The Orioles continue to play the waiver game this offseason, and their newest claim is outfielder Weston Wilson. Tell you more about him coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, January 23rd, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about another waiver claim that has been made by the Orioles. They are really kind of toying with that final spot on the 40-man roster right now, trying to just keep as many guys into their organization as possible. And another waiver find is outfielder Weston Wilson coming over on the waiver wire from the Philadelphia Phillies. We'll talk about his time in Philly and what he could do for the Orioles if he sticks in Baltimore. Then we'll talk a bit about the MacKenzie Gore trade sent from the Nationals to the Rangers on Thursday. If the Orioles were interested, what they would have had to give up and what it means for the starting pitching market, and then a couple other pieces of news and notes and things to get to at the end of the show. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. But first, I want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day and making the Locked On Network now the #1 sports podcast network. So let's go ahead and start with the Orioles roster move that was made on, I believe, Thursday. Yeah, I think it was made on Thursday. I think right after I was all done recording and posting Thursday's episode. So this gets pushed to Friday, and that is Weston Wilson. He is the newest Baltimore Oriole as he was claimed off waivers by the O's on Thursday. So who is Weston Wilson? He is a 31-year-old right-handed hitting utility man, mostly an outfielder, but can play the infield as well, that we'll get to, who was DFA'd by the Phillies last week when they re-signed catcher JT Realmuto to a 3-year contract. Now, Weston Wilson, he, saw some big league time last year, played in 54 games at the big league level for the Phillies in 2025, was mostly an up-down bench guy. It was his final year with minor league options. He had 125 plate appearances for the Phillies last season, slashed 198, 282, 369. That's an 81 WRC plus, meaning he was 19% worse than league average as a hitter when he was at the plate. Hit 5 homers, stole 2 bases, about a 10% walk rate, which was good. 27% strikeout rate, a little bit high. We'll get to that as well. But that was the full season for Weston Wilson with the Phillies. Now, he did begin the season on the IL with an oblique strain, missed about the first month of the year, and was activated on April 23rd, and seemingly never got fully healthy from the oblique. It was kind of on a much lower level, the Gunnar Henderson story of 2025, and he was hitting 194 with a 71 WRC plus in limited playing time for the Phillies, optioned him to AAA on June 19th. Hit pretty well in AAA for about a month, looked more like his usual self. And on July 19th, when Alec Boehm went on the injured list, the Phillies called him back up, and he did remain on the roster for the remainder of the regular season, but he didn't play a whole lot, was mostly a platoon guy against lefties, had only 83 plate appearances and just an 86 WRC plus from that point into the end of the season. Now, he did make the Phillies NLDS roster against the Dodgers, but he didn't start any of the games. He had 0 plate appearances. I think he mostly just came in as a pinch runner in that series because he does have a little bit of sneaky speed despite being at 31, but did not step to the plate in that playoff series. He stuck around for a while in the offseason, but with the Phillies making the Realmuto move to bring him back, Weston Wilson went on his way. Now, he's been in the Phillies organization for the past 3 years. He signed a minor league contract with the Phillies before the 2023 season, and it started off strong for him. He went to AAA to begin that year and hit 31 homers with a 117 WRC plus in AAA in 2023 before the Phillies finally called him up in August. And what did he do? He homers in his first big league plate appearance in August of that year for the Phillies. He ended up only playing 8 games in the big leagues, but he did go 5 for 16 with 6 walks versus 5 strikeouts. He was optioned 2 weeks later. He came up for 2 more days in September and then went back down. Basically, he was a replacement for Brandon Marsh for 2 weeks while he was on the injured list in the Phillies outfield. But otherwise, they felt like, hey, at least we have some pretty solid depth. And it was solid enough where they actually put Wilson, despite him being in AAA, on the wild card round roster. Now, he did not appear in a game in that 2-game wildcard series, and then he was left off the roster for the NLDS and the NLCS. Of course, that was the year the Phillies lost to the Diamondbacks in the NLCS to end their season. So he came back in 2024. He didn't make the team out of camp, so he began the year in AAA. And once again, he hit the ball pretty well in AAA like he's used to. They called him up briefly for a couple of weeks when they needed a healthy hitter in June, then was optioned again. But he came back in July of 2024 when Whit Merrifield was on the Phillies and was just doing nothing offensively. They released Whit Merrifield, and Wilson, who can play the outfield and the infield and hits right-handed, felt like a pretty good replacement for Merrifield. So they brought him back up to the roster, and he did stick for the rest of the season. And this time, he showed why the Phillies wanted him and showed why, he's got the skills to put up good numbers in AAA, because he put up some good numbers in the big leagues. Now, again, it was very limited playing time. It was 41 games and just 98 big league plate appearances down the stretch, but he hit 284 with a 129 WRC plus, meaning he was 29% better than a league average hitter down the stretch that season. The Phillies were essentially using him as a platoon bat. He was only starting against fellow left-handed pitchers. He faced more lefties than righties. He still did face some righties when he was in there, but generally he was in there to be a lefty masher, and he was doing a good job with that. He was kind of in a platoon in left field with left-handed hitting Brandon Marsh, who really struggles against left-handed pitching. And then later in the season, when Alec Boehm went on the injured list again, Wilson actually played some third base because Merrifield was no longer on the roster and Boehm was out. And if you combine the short time in 2023 and then his hot streak in 2024, in that stretch, Weston Wilson, now again, it was only 60 plate appearances against lefties, not a big sample size, but against left-handed pitchers in that stretch, he hit 333 with a 450 on base and a 646 slugging percentage. That was good for a 194 WRC plus against lefties in those 2 years. Now, if you considerably lower the minimum number of plate appearances to 60 against left-handed pitchers between 2023 and 2024, again, this is kind of cherry picking because it's a really small minimum plate appearances, but if you lower it to that minimum, the only hitter in Major League Baseball who was better against left-handed pitching than Weston Wilson in that stretch was some guy named Aaron Judge. That was the only guy who was better than Wilson. Tyler O'Neill, I believe, was fourth on that list at the time. Aaron Judge, number one. Weston Wilson, number two. And he also had a really cool moment. August 15th of that year, he hits for the cycle kind of out of nowhere as a member of the Phillies. So, of course, with him hitting well and mashing lefties, he made the NLDS roster and actually started in left field in Game 4 of that NLDS. The Mets were starting lefty David Peterson, and Wilson went out there. Now, he did go 0 for 3 and was pulled for a pinch hitter in the ninth inning against Edwin Diaz, but he at least got to make his playoff debut in the batter's box. Then, of course, came back in 2025, didn't play as much, and as we mentioned, was DFA'd by the Phillies this offseason. Now, Wilson initially was a draft pick of the Brewers, 17th round selection all the way back in 2016 out of Clemson, and he climbed up the Brewers system. He made it to AAA in 2021 and had a fantastic season. He was maybe the Brewers' best hitter in AAA, and that's a Brewers team that struggles for offense a little bit, but for some reason they never called him up. So he went back to AAA in 2022 after not making the team out of camp, and all of a sudden was just really bad. All the skills he had shown that year before kind of went away. He was a below average hitter, and after the season, he was essentially released. He elected free agency after the 2022 season with the Brewers without ever making the big leagues with them, signed that minor league deal with the Phillies, and that was the year, of course, that he did make his debut. Now, when we've seen him, there's also been some good stuff under the hood. He ran a 50% hard hit rate in his good year in 2024, and even a solid 41% last year when he struggled overall. It comes with pretty good bat speed that peaked in September of 2025, the last time we saw him, which is nice. And he is a guy who swings and misses a lot, which is why he's never solidified himself as a big league starter. But he doesn't chase a lot out of the zone. He's got a pretty good batting eye, and he can impact the baseball and certainly hit some lefties. Now, defensively, he's probably considered a super utility guy. He has played at least one big league inning in left field, center field, right field, third base, second base, first base, and even pitcher in just parts of 3 seasons in Major League Baseball with the Phillies. And he also with the Phillies in AAA in 2023 and 2024 was basically their AAA starting shortstop. He's never played shortstop in the majors, mostly because the Phillies have had Trey Turner and they've had Edmundo Sosa kind of as his backup on the roster, but he has played a ton of shortstop recently in AAA, and it's also a place where in an emergency, he could certainly play the position. Now, in the big leagues, most of his innings have come in left field, and that's where he's played the most in his pro career, but he played a good chunk of third base with Bohm out as well, and even a little chunk of second and right field. Again, I mentioned he's pitched 4 innings, the position player pitcher as well. He really is super utility. Now, he's not particularly like great or elite defensively at any of those spots, but when you get these super utility guys who play the infield and the outfield, it's really hard to find ones who are elite at one of those positions, because if they were elite at that position, they'd probably just stay there throughout their minor league career, right? The reason why you get moved around is because you have at least some defensive questions, but your bat's good enough that a team wants to get you in the lineup. And that's the case with Weston Wilson. He's not going to grade out as a super plus defender anywhere, but he's not going to grade out so bad at any of those positions that you're like, we can never play him there. Like, you probably don't want to play him in center field, even though he has a little bit of run there, but corner outfield, first base, second base, third base, if you put him there for a couple of games because you need him there, your defense, it's not going to be stellar, not going to be gold glove, but it's going to be totally fine, at least from what he has shown at the big league level. Now, again, there's no guarantee this guy is going to stick with the Orioles. As we've seen, the Orioles go through the waiver and DFA train with guys just like this throughout this offseason so far. They're claiming guys. They're trying to then DFA them a week or two later to get them to pass through waivers, so hopefully they can stick in the organization off the 40-man roster and remain in the org as depth. It worked with left-handed pitcher Josh Walker. It worked with outfielder Jhonkensy Noel. It did not work with Marco Luciano, who was actually claimed off waivers by the New York Yankees this week, so we'll see what the O's do with him. It did not work with catcher Drew Romo, who they claimed DFA'd, and he's bounced around a couple of other teams so far this offseason. So it's certainly a hit or miss strategy that they are going with here, but they did it again here. They claimed Wilson, and who did they DFA to make room? Well, that is left-handed pitcher Jose Suarez, who they had claimed off waivers from the Braves just last week. So the hope is that Suarez will clear waivers and stay with the O's. And the same thing for Wilson. Quite honestly, at some point in the next couple of weeks, either when they hopefully make a signing or when they find someone else on waivers they like, they will DFA this same guy, Weston Wilson, and they will hope that he goes through waivers, clears waivers, and stays with the Orioles organization. Because if he does stay with the O's, at least, in AAA and in big league camp, despite not being on the 40-man, he kind of gives you a more experienced version of Jeremiah Jackson, right? With Ramon Arias and Jorge Mateo no longer here, there could be some sort of battle for a utility infielder, utility player to make this Orioles opening day roster off the bench. It seems clear that Jeremiah Jackson is kind of the front runner for that spot right now with how good he was in the 2 months after getting called up and making his debut last year. And there's still the question of, Kobe Mayo and Ryan Mountcastle are still on this roster. So what in the world are the Orioles going to do with that situation as we creep, well less than a month until spring training begins? But Wilson gives you a guy where, if the Jeremiah Jackson thing was all kind of smoke and mirrors for 2 months, Wilson gives you a right-handed hitter who can play the infield and the outfield and has some pop in the bat. He's basically just an older version of Jeremiah Jackson. So it's nice to have maybe a security blanket if you give the keys to Jackson for that position. And in April and May, it's just not what you want. In June, if you have Weston Wilson sitting in AAA, he's a guy who's had 3 years big league experience with one of the best teams in baseball, can easily come up and handle that spot. And it wouldn't even have to be an everyday player, you don't think, just a nice bench guy to have. Always good to have depth like this, especially experienced depth with some upside in hitting lefties that a guy like Weston Wilson has. He is out of minor league options. That makes it a little harder if you do call him up at some point, but that's a problem for the Orioles way down the road. So they got Weston Wilson this week. One guy they did not get is MacKenzie Gore, who was one of the top trade targets among starting pitchers this offseason. He was dealt from the Washington Nationals to the Texas Rangers on Thursday. We'll break down that trade and how it impacts the Orioles coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. And this year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, just meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. You upload your documents, you go about your day, and you can get updates right in the TurboTax app. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. And if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. So take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. So for the Orioles, they are, we hope, still in the search of one more starting pitcher this offseason that's going to kind of sit in the top three of their rotation. And some would argue that a guy like MacKenzie Gore could have filled that role for the Orioles. But after on Wednesday night, the Mets acquired Freddie Peralta in a trade with the Brewers, broke that down on yesterday's episode and how much it was a high price, but I really wanted Freddie Peralta. Another starter moved one day later. Left-handed pitcher MacKenzie Gore traded from the Nationals to the Texas Rangers in exchange for 5 prospects. Now, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, I'm putting up my spreadsheet I've been working with among the top free agent and trade starting pitchers available this offseason. As you can see from my starters available, I ranked 15 of them. MacKenzie Gore was number 9 on my list out of 15, right? Guys above him who got traded: Sonny Gray at number 5, Freddie Peralta at number 1. Joe Ryan, Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, Nick Pivetta. Actually, Shane Baz was also traded to the Orioles. And then Chris Bubich. Those are guys who are still out there. There are people that are certainly going to be higher on MacKenzie Gore than I am. There are people who's going to look at this top 15 list and tell me I'm crazy for having MacKenzie Gore as low as number 9 on this list. For me, Gore just kind of doesn't do it for me. He's a good pitcher. He's only 26 years old, although he will be 27 in about a month. So this will be his age 27 season. He's got 2 years of team control left, so he'll be a free agent after 2027. And he showed some flashes, right? I mean, he has made at least 27 starts in each of the last 3 years for the Nationals since coming over from the Padres in the Juan Soto trade. But also, like, the 3.90 ERA he posted in 2024 is the best run prevention we've seen from him. It's good strikeout numbers, but it's also some shaky walk numbers at times. You know, he's got good stuff as a left-hander, and he's very young. Those are two things you're going to like. The stuff did take a significant step back, especially with the fastball and the curveball in 2025. So that's something you're at least monitoring with him, right? The fastball dropped by about a mile per hour velocity-wise in 2025 as well. He had a little shoulder issue that put him on the IL in August and September. He also finished incredibly poorly. He's generally been a little better in the first half of his career, in the first half of seasons than the second half, but it really blew up on him in 2025. I mean, he had a 3.02 ERA in the first half. I believe he was an all-star last season. He was awesome for the Nats. And then after the all-star break, Gore posted a 6.75 ERA. And again, he was mostly healthy until the end of August. It was rough to watch him down the stretch. And maybe some of it is the Nationals were a disaster and completely out of it for the entire second half, but he just was not good. Would MacKenzie Gore have helped the Orioles? Absolutely. You trade for him right now. He is immediately one of the best 5 starters on the roster, and he's in your opening day rotation. So in that sense, I would have been fine if they made the deal. I think Shane Baz is better. Like, I frankly think Shane Baz fits this team better and is a better pitcher, and I'm happier they went after him than Gore, who kind of came over in a similar package on what the Nationals got from the Rangers in that deal. Now, it is kind of surprising that the Rangers got him. They were a team that has talked about shedding payroll this offseason, right? They traded away Marcus Semien. They non-tendered Jonah Heim and Adolis Garcia back in November. They haven't really spent a whole lot besides on a couple of bullpen arms so far this offseason, and there has been talk they wanted to get their payroll down. It had gotten a little out of hand, at least they thought, down in Texas, but not like Gore's going to cost you a lot. I guess that is one part of it, right? He's going to make $5.6 million in 2026 in arbitration. You can expect him to make, no more than $10 million at the absolute most in 2027 in his final year. So it's pretty cheap to get a good starting pitcher, but they still want to cut money, it seems. So maybe some of their expensive, still good veteran starters like a Nathan Eovaldi or a Jacob deGrom, it's not completely out of the question that one of those two guys could be available via trade in the next 2 months before opening day. That is totally possible. If that is possible, the Orioles should be all over both of those guys. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know how big of a fan I am of Nathan Eovaldi and how many times I've said time and time again for the Orioles, either via trade or when he was a free agent, to go and get him, and they still haven't done it. He was awesome last year despite some injuries. that's kind of the same story with Jacob deGrom at this point. If they're available now, maybe we go ahead and do that potentially. I mean, there's been no reporting that because of this deal, they're now going to make those guys available. You kind of look at the Rangers rotation. It's still deGrom, Eovaldi, Gore, then Jack Leiter, and then probably Jacob Latz is still your number 5, either him or, if a Kamar Rocker is healthy or if a Cody Bradford is healthy. So it's not like they, have so many starters they don't know what to do with. It's still not one of the best rotations in baseball. They probably needed a, healthier guy or at least higher upside guy like Gore. I think there's a downside here with the way he has crumbled late in seasons, especially last year with the injury late in the year, with the stuff going down, and with him only having 2 years of control. I don't know. He was a big-time prospect when he was with the Padres. I am just not fully sold on McKenzie Gore, and this is a kind of a similar trade to the Shane Baz one. I am happy the Orioles went and got Baz rather than getting Gore. But, you can at least look at what the Rangers gave up. It was 5 prospects. It was infielder Gavin Feen, first-round pick for the Rangers last year out of high school. It was 24-year-old righty Alejandro Rosario, who was a top pitching prospect in high A in 2024. Then he missed all of 2025 with an elbow injury and maybe some other medical stuff, so he didn't get Tommy John, so he's just now going to get Tommy John, so he's also going to miss all of 2026. 20-year-old infielder Devin Fitzgerald had an awesome season in rookie ball last year. 23-year-old kind of corner outfielder Abimelech Ortiz, big power bat, looked good in AAA last year. And then they got 20-year-old outfielder Yeremy Cabrera, who was pretty good in low A in 2025. Really, Ortiz, who was in AAA, is the only guy who has a chance of debuting in 2026 for the Nationals. They somewhat went quantity over quality with this deal to go and get guys who are definitely further away from the big leagues, but banking on some of those guys popping. It's a lot tougher to comp this trade to the Orioles than what I did with the Freddie Peralta trade with the Mets on yesterday's episode, because it's 5 players instead of 2, and it's guys who are a lot further away from the big league, so they're just harder to comp to other prospects. I would say Vahiva Aloy, one of the Orioles' first-round picks from last year, is probably your Gavin Fine comp. I mean, Aloy Aloy is probably better, but it's a similar comp there. Braxton Bragg maybe is your Rosario comp, a guy coming off a great season, but getting Tommy John is going to be out for a year. Rosario is definitely a better pitching prospect, so maybe that evens things up there. Wilfred De La Cruz, the young infielder the Orioles got in the Andrew Kittredge trade from the Cubs, he's your Fitzgerald comp, like young player, great first year in the low minor leagues. Maybe Thomas Sosa is your Ortiz comp. Sosa's only in AA while Ortiz is in AAA, so Ortiz definitely closer to the majors, but both like big-time power, corner outfielders, questions about their defense, questions about the hit tool. And then maybe like a Tavian Josenberger type is similar to Yeremy Cabrera, a pretty good guy in the low minors, get to AA. We'll see what he does. Kind of a prospect you're not really going to rank a lot of places. So that would be the deal. Aloy, Bragg, De La Cruz, Sosa, and Josenberger. It's not like you're giving up a ton. Aloy and Bragg are good prospects, but that's also just not if that were the deal, it's not a deal I would have done to get McKenzie Gore. Is that somewhat because I'm, I talked about being the high man on Freddie Peralta. I might be the low man on McKenzie Gore. That's just my personal thoughts on it. Let me know here in the YouTube comments. If those 5 prospects went for McKenzie Gore, would you have been happy with that deal for the Orioles? I say no. And I was happy with the Shane Baz deal, which is probably giving up a little bit more, but that's just because I think Shane Baz is significantly better. But that's maybe what a Gore trade would have looked like for the Orioles had they done one like that. Couple other pieces of news and notes and things to get to at the end of the show. So we'll get to that right after this. So the big, I guess, final move made right before this show here on Friday is that the best relief pitcher remaining on the market has signed, and his name is Seranthony Dominguez, the former Oriole who the O's acquired at the 2024 trade deadline from the Phillies, then dealt him to the Blue Jays at the 2025 deadline, became a free agent this year, and according to Jeff Passan of ESPN on Friday, Dominguez has signed a 2-year, $20 million contract with the Chicago White Sox. Now, Dominguez was really good for the Orioles this year. He also had a lot more walk problems than he had recently, but the strikeouts went up. He found that new kind of change-up splitter that really changed the way he was able to pitch to lefties. He was traded to the Blue Jays. He was one of their top high leverage arms as they made their run all the way to the Game 7 of the World Series last year. Was not their most trusted reliever, and he did have a couple of blow-up outings, but was overall good for Toronto. But they chose not to bring him back. I'm sure the Orioles at least had some interest in adding to their bullpen and bringing Seranthony back. I think what this is with him signing with a team that's getting better in the White Sox, but still is not going to be a postseason team or not going to be that good in 2026, you would think. This feels like a situation where Dominguez really wanted a 2-year deal at this point. Like, age-wise, he's not old, but, you look at him and he's 31, and, would a 33-year-old reliever be able to get a multiple-year deal? Probably not. So I think he feels this is his only big chance to get another multi-year deal in free agency. Feels like to me, and we'll see if reporting comes out here, that Dominguez was maybe just holding out for a multi-year deal, and that teams like the Blue Jays and the Orioles and others were perfectly happy to offer Dominguez, 1 year, $8, $9, $10 million to be a high leverage setup man for them. But we're like, given 2 years and legit money to relievers, unless they're like lockdown closers, like of course the Orioles gave to Ryan Helsley earlier this offseason, and that even has an opt-out after year 1, is a little bit of a riskier game. And it feels like not a lot of teams are willing to offer the 2 years, but the White Sox firmly were willing to offer the 2 years. I'm sure Dominguez wasn't 100% bought into pitching for a bad team, but when they were the only team with the 2-year offer, maybe he just went ahead and accepted that. And there's always the chance that, he pitches for a good half season, the White Sox are out of it, and they trade a reliever in Dominguez with good stuff with a year and a half of control to someone else and get something back at the deadline, and he does pitch for a team down the stretch in the pennant race in October again in 2026, like he did for the Orioles in 24 and for the Blue Jays in 25. Would have liked to have him back. He's the best reliever on the board. Otherwise, it's getting a slim pickings. You've got Danny Coulomb and Weston Wilson, a couple of interesting lefties out there. I'd say David Robertson, Tommy Kahnle, Michael Kopech, probably the best right-handed relievers that are available. But those top relief names, the Orioles already did retrade for Andrew Kittredge and sign Ryan Helsley, so they've certainly already made 2 bullpen additions. I still think they're one good, solid, trustworthy reliever away. I think I'd lean towards it being a lefty, but if it's a righty like Dominguez who has that good pitch against lefties, or someone like Kahnle, that's totally fine too. We'll see if they just kind of want to roll with this bullpen, and maybe it gives them more optional flexibility, but that was the last lockdown. Yeah, I'm fine with that guy being in the 8th inning right now guy that I think was out there in Dominguez. And now he, of course, is off the board. Wanted to talk about 2 more things before we go here. Obviously, I think the big thing on the mind of a lot of people in Baltimore and in Maryland this weekend is that we might be having a big snowstorm coming in, Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, whenever it's truly going to come in. Hopefully you are going to stay safe out there. Enjoy the snow if you can. Hopefully it's not too much that it shuts anything down in the city. But it just gave me the reminder to kind of talk about something that I've been working with some, and I think is a really good cause in the city. And that is the Baltimore Community Fridge Network. If you're looking for a way to help and get some help to some people before this snowstorm comes in, or really at any time, there is a network of community fridges around the city. Basically, what you do is you make food, you buy food, you have leftovers, whatever it is, you go drop them off at these different locations. There's actual fridges, there's pantries as well, there's freezers there as well if you need to put them there. And anyone in the community can come and take the food. They need the food, they want the food, no questions asked. It's really just a good way to give back to the community, especially if the weather's getting tough. It can be tougher for people to get food and find food at those times as well. So if you're able to get out there here on Friday or Saturday before the storm and you have some leftovers, you have some extra stuff you're able to make and want to give back, I put the link in the show notes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts of the link tree to the Baltimore Community Fridge Network of really the locations of all the fridges. Find one near you and how it works. Just something we've been doing that I thought I'd give a shout out to, doing some good work. And in a similar vein, we are getting very close here to February, obviously very close to spring training starting. And as February bleeds into March, we also, I know, get really close to baseball season starting, not in an Orioles capacity or professional capacity, but youth baseball, high school baseball, little league baseball, whatever it may be. If you are a parent, a coach, a volunteer, a commissioner, whomever of a youth baseball league, high school baseball, little league baseball in Baltimore, in the city, or in the surrounding areas, and you are ever looking for, you need more coaches, you need, donations for uniforms, equipment, volunteers, spaces, fields, whatever it may be, I'd love to be a resource in expanding access to youth baseball in Baltimore. So if you have anything that is needed for your organization, shoot me an email, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. At the very least, I can send that ask out on this show, and hopefully me or other people out there can be willing to pitch in and help, because definitely want to make sure that any kid who wants to play can have a chance to play baseball, hopefully fall in love with baseball in the same way I did, and I know many out there listening and watching have as well. And I think we can get some access to many out there to play what is, in my opinion, the best sport that we have in this society. But that'll do it for today's episode, and that'll do it for the week, unless, of course, we get some Framber news, right? I mean, at this point, everybody else is gone besides Framber Valdez. Everybody who needed a pitcher seems to have gotten one, at least a top-line guy-ish, except for the Orioles. And, yes, I know it's Jim Bowden, but there was a Jim Bowden piece in The Athletic on Friday where he was like, Framber's the number one free agent left. And he's like, all the sources and people I'm talking to just expect Framber Valdez to sign a deal with the Orioles at some point. He did mention a couple other teams that are interested, but said only if the price and the years come down and there are teams who aren't willing to pay what it could take. It seems like every single sign is pointing to Framber signing with the Orioles, which makes me honestly even more worried that it's not going to happen. But of course, if that deal breaks, I'll certainly come to you live, even if we're snowed in this weekend, as long as there's power in the house and a Framber deal comes down, I will certainly have that podcast for you. And if not, we'll still be back on Monday. Until then, I am Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.